Hey, thanks so much for watching Central Online today. My name's Drew Bodine. I'm one of the pastors here. We're in week 3 of our series, Like a Boss, and I want to give a shout out to TJ watching in Cypress, California. TJ, thanks so much for being a part of the Central family. And if any of you want your picture or name to appear right here on the screen, I want to encourage you right now, get out your phone, take a picture of your screen in whatever city you live, and make sure to hashtag Central Online. And who knows, you might appear up on the screen next week. Also, if you live near one of our Central Church locations, I want to encourage you to get out of bed and get here. Watching online is amazing, but it's even better in person. So make sure you go to centralonline.tv/locations to find a time and location near you. But for now, get ready to experience Central Online.
Through the night, 3 days victory was yours by morning light. Beyond the smoke, beyond the haze, a flag of victory is raised. You charged the hill of Calvary and won the grave. Here we go. Tag now, where is your steed? Thanks be to God. Us will remain. Now we have unending grace. We won't let it go to waste. Send our call sign to the world. We have been saved. Where's your victory? Come on, Dad. And thanks be to God. Thanks be to God who gives us the victory.
from Central Online. My name's Chloe. I'm one of the worship leaders here at Central. If it's your first time here, I want you to know that Central's a place where it's okay to not be okay. That means you can come as you are, you belong. We're so glad that you're here. Our experience is about an hour long, and afterwards, I want to encourage you to go to centralonline.tv/welcome. You can fill out a short form, let us know a little more about who you are, and when you do, we have a free song we want to email you called I Lift My Eyes off of our Central Live album, Greater. Well, coming up is Easter at Central, and for times and locations, you can go to easteratcentral.com. It's going to be incredible. But for now, let's continue with our experience.
Would you stand and sing with us?
When it doesn't go my way, I know that it is not the end. I'm trusting you have better plans I haven't even dreamt of yet. I know that you are for me when everything's against me. I put all my hope in you. Jesus, I will trust you. I will trust you. I know you never fail. I will trust you. Jesus, I will. You finished it. I close my eyes and just let go and fall into my only hope. There's safety in the falling when I surrender fully. I put all my hope in you, Jesus. Jesus, I will trust you. Trust you. I know you never fail. I will trust you. Jesus, I will. I will. Oh, Jesus, I will. I will. The only thing I know is God, you're in control in every little detail. You are close. I'll never be alone. And here in the unknown, the power of your presence fills my soul. Now everything I know, God, you're in control.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're in week 3 of our series, Like a Boss, where Pastor Judd is helping us better understand some tools on how we can manage our resources, from our spending to our saving and even our generosity. And I want to give a huge shout out to all of you who have become generosity rock stars over the last couple of weeks. In fact, your names are going to appear right here at the bottom of the screen. I'm praying that over 500 people who watch online will take this step of faith. In fact, we use these resources ultimately to introduce people to Jesus and help them follow Him, but it also helps feed hungry families in our cities. Those who have addictions, break those through Celebrate Recovery. Even those who are incarcerated experience God behind bars. In fact, I sat down with a guy named Gus who has an incredible story we wanted to share with you on how God has changed his heart and life since the time he was incarcerated, but ultimately what he's doing now for the kingdom. Check out his story.
Born and raised in Southern California, close to Compton, Watts, East LA, so it's challenging growing up. My mom was a single parent. She would make us go to church, and we'll come in through the front and I'll just leave through the back because I did not want anything to do with church. I really got into some trouble. I was already in high school, senior, and made some wrong choices, hung out with the wrong crowd, and it landed me, unfortunately, in incarceration. In jail, they give you these Bibles, and I remember grabbing it and saying, Lord, if you truly are whom everybody says you are, you know, I need you right now. I made a vow, I made a promise, saying, Lord, if you can get me out of this situation, then I will do my very best to honor you. Passing through that, went to community college, tried to better myself. I started seeing some people coming to Vegas. That was booming at that time in 2003. I met a gentleman that he definitely modeled the love of Jesus. Everything he spoke or read, it was with such love, and that right there was one of those eye-openers. Like, you know what? This guy's the real deal, and I kind of want what he has. So I started going to church. I said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna go all in. I had a daughter, very young, and a wife. And I can't do it without you, God, so I'm gonna trust you wholeheartedly. And you need to follow through. There's no options here. Sure enough, he started providing. I was always afraid to start my company just because my competitors were bigger, better. But I started, you know, going to yard sales and going to pawn stores, buying a ladder here, buying an extension cord here. Little as much of God is in it. And not only did he have my heart, but now I started trusting him with my finances, with my future. That's when, I guess you can say, the radical generosity started taking place. When I started the company, my goal was to like give a $10,000 check. I was so moved to do that. And I don't know how, because that means if I'm gonna give a $10,000 check, that means I have $100,000 on me. Long behold, less than a year, I was able to write that $10,000 check, and I remember how excited I was and nervous. So I said, Lord, if I'm faithful with little, I know you can trust me with much. And that's when I started seeing the fruits. The Lord will make a way, and he'll continue saying, are you gonna do your part? Don't hold on to 5%. Don't hold on to 2%, don't hold on to 8. Give the 10. And the only reason I say that is because I've seen so many things come into my life. In order to be there, you gotta give what's really holding your heart. That's how you start. Don't be afraid to start small. That's how I started. Whatever holds your heart is what matters.
What an incredible story of what God has done in Gus's life, from the time he turned his life around to what he's doing now to ultimately impact the kingdom through his own generosity. And I want to encourage you, if you have yet to become a generosity rock star, to consider getting in the game today. Generosity Rockstar is someone who simply gives a minimum of $20 reoccurring online. And we've set up a really safe and secure way for you to do that here at Central. You can go to centralonline.tv/give to set up that safe and secure gift now. But when you do, we have a coin that we want to send you. It's something you can keep in your wallet, your purse, or your pocket. We also want to send you a copy of our brand new Central Live album, Greater, in the mail this week. So I want to encourage you to get signed up. Next week, we're going to celebrate all the brand new rock stars who signed up. Again, we're praying that over 500 people will take this step of faith through this series, Like a Boss. So get in the game now. Let's continue in our worship experience together.
The one who made the blind to see is moving here in front of me, moving here in front of me. The one who made the deaf to hear is silencing my every fear, silencing my every fear. I believe in you, I believe in you. You're the God of miracles. Come on. I believe in you, I believe in you. You're the God of miracles. The one who does impossible is reaching out to make me whole, reaching out to make me whole. The one who put death in its place, his life is flowing through my veins, his life is flowing through my veins. I believe in you, I believe in you. You're the God of miracles. Every voice sing that out. I believe in you, I believe in you. that chorus one more time. I believe in you. And I believe in you. I believe in you. You're the God of miracles. And I believe in you. I believe in you. You're the God of miracles. Turn your eyes upon Jesus and turn your eyes upon Jesus and look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.
Central record label. Please hold.
The boss is here.
The boss is here. Jenny, tell the band the boss is here.
So, do you want to be a rock star?
All right, welcome everybody. Nice to see you guys. I want to welcome not only our Henderson location, I want to say a big shout out to Summerlin, Southern Highlands, to our Sunrise Mountain family, to those joining us at our Kingman location and our Central Newcastle location, those joining us in our partnership with God Behind Bars and different prison facilities, those watching online, thank you guys for being with us today. All right, well, hey, once a year around here at Central, we do a financial series, and we are in the middle of that right now. We always stop to look at some principles from the Bible to help us manage this area of our lives that studies say causes probably the majority of stress that we feel and that we experience in relationships and marriages and families. It's a huge issue. So week one, we talked about sort of this kind of core idea of facing the future with faith rather than with fear. And we talked about our stuff, our resources, all that God blesses us with. And we asked the question, are we holding it or is it holding us? And so I'm gonna encourage you to go check that out if you weren't here for that message. Last week, we basically talked about this idea that you can't out-earn bad spending habits. You can't out-earn bad spending habits. So we talked about 3 habits: the pay now habit, the pay yourself habit, and the pay it forward habit. This week, I want to talk to you about what's probably dearest to my heart, and that is a little bit more on this pay it forward idea. I want to talk to you about the power of generosity in our lives. And anytime, pastors spend a considerable amount of time talking about finances and generosity, people can rightly get skeptical. Churches have abused this, and certainly biblical passages have been twisted, and a lot of things have been distorted. So let me just give you some disclaimers before I just go into this message, okay? Number 1 disclaimer, I don't want anything from you, okay? I do want some things for you, but I don't want anything from you. Number 2, our church is not in financial trouble. We actually, our giving is up this year over last year. We're doing just fine, thank you, okay? Number 3, if you're a guest with us, I don't talk about this all the time. And number 4, this is really about unleashing something in your own life. And so my encouragement to you is just open your heart to God and His Word. If you think what I'm about to share with you as it relates to generosity is about Central trying to get something from you, look, I'll be the first to say, I want you to trust God and be generous. Give your money to a nonprofit, give your money to a church, give your money to the poor. You can do a lot of good things with your resources. And if you think it's about Central trying to get something from you, then I want to be the first to say, go find a church in the phone book and give to them. Okay? All right. Now, having said all that, we're gonna have a lot of fun. This is a very important topic to my heart because it's something that I've had an experience with in my relationship with God over 25 years that has been transformative for our family. And I think it's what I'm about to share with you is I think some of the steps that we've taken in our life that have helped me experience more and more of God's blessing in my own heart and in my own life. When I first became a follower of Christ, I came out of addiction. I came from a lot of brokenness and pain. And I remember thinking like, when it came to stuff in my life, I felt like, look, God doesn't need my money. The church doesn't need my money. I need my money. Hello, somebody, right? Like I'm trying to pay bills. I can't even cover my own basic expenses. I don't have enough. Therefore, God's got everything. I have nothing is what it felt like. And so here's what I did. I got involved in our local church. The church saved my life. I love the church, by the way. I've given my whole life, dedicated it to serving you and to serving the church. I love the local church. Look, the church isn't perfect, right? It's not perfect, but God uses everyday people to do extraordinary things. And the church saved my life. I came out of addiction, wandered into our home church on my own terms at 17 years old, found my way to a little group, a little Bible study, and these people walked with me and encouraged me. So I loved the church. I loved what our church was doing. I loved how lives were being impacted by Christ in the church. I just felt like when it came to my stuff and my money, like I just didn't have enough. And so I felt like I could not afford to give. I just couldn't afford to. So I served, I used my time and my abilities. I actually taught a little kids class, and I would show up every weekend and go in and teach these kids. And I was leveraging what I could. I was trying to make a difference, but I wasn't giving financially. And my reasoning was simply that I could not afford to give. And over time, God began to do a work in my heart and in my life. And he convicted me with this thought. And that was that I could trust God with my eternal salvation, but I couldn't trust him with $100. And it just really convicted me. And I began to realize as I studied the Bible on this topic, that generosity isn't about the church. It isn't about people trying to get things from you. Generosity is about you putting God first in your individual life, on your own spiritual journey. And when you get to that place and realize that's what it's about, and you begin to trust God and put him first, it opens up a whole realm of supernatural things that happen in your life. Some of them money related, some of them not. But you're opening up God's provision and blessing in your life in the financial area. That was my experience. And I realized while I felt like for a long time I couldn't afford to give, the reality was I couldn't afford to not give. I had to be generous with what God had put in my heart and in my life. So I want to talk to you about generosity. Now this applies to a lot more than just money, right? Being generous is about being kind to people around you. It's about being generous with, your home, your time. Time is probably the greatest commodity that we have, right? Being generous with our time, being generous with our gifts. And we talk about that stuff most of the time around here at Central, but this weekend I want to focus in with you a little bit more on the topic of financial generosity. Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19, let's look at what Jesus says about how we handle stuff in our lives. Matthew chapter 6, beginning in verse 19. Let's bring this up on the screens. When we get to the red word, I'm going to ask you to read it out loud here with me. He says, don't store up treasures here on earth where moth and rust where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your what? Heart will be also. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. Now there's a lot here. First of all, Jesus acknowledges that we have this desire in our lives to store up treasures, right? We want to store up stuff. Anybody collect stuff, right? Golfers collect golf gear. I'm a guitarist. I got more guitars than I'm willing to admit to you. We like to collect stuff. That's a desire in us. There's nothing necessarily bad about that desire. Jesus actually kind of taps into that and says, look, the important thing is that you're you're treasuring things and you're storing up things that will outlast your life. And so he says, store up your treasures in heaven. Well, what are treasures in heaven? Well, treasures in heaven, that's a broad term, and it could be used to describe the hospitality you show to people. It could be used to describe the giving that you do to the poor, the generosity that you show to the church or to others. It could be used to describe, any way you leverage your time and your influence to bring God and his goodness into the life of somebody else. What are you doing? You're storing up treasures in heaven. And those treasures cannot be eaten up by moth or time or anything else. Those treasures last forever. And so Jesus kind of says, look, yeah, we all have this desire to store up and collect and to build up, but he says, give your life to things ultimately that will matter and that will make an eternal difference and eternal impact. He says, where your treasures are, there your heart will be also. We usually kind of think of that like where your heart is, there your treasure is. Jesus sort of flips it around. He says, look, the heart in the original language gets to this idea. It's more than just kind of what you feel or your desires. People say, I feel like I'm in love. My heart just tells me I'm in love. She's the one. But the heart, from a biblical sense, is bigger than all of that. The heart gets down to your innermost thoughts, desires, and actions and motivations. And Paul at one point in the New Testament even talks about his own heart and says, it's a mystery, right? It's even hard to get to the bottom of our own heart. That's why sometimes I undermine myself and I don't even realize that I'm doing it, right? Hello. Something's going on in the heart. It's a deep mystery. But Jesus says, if you want a clue to your heart, he says, look at what you treasure. One way we could say that is, remember Jerry Maguire and the movie line where he says, show me the money. He's saying, look, you want to know where your heart is, look at your checkbook. Look at where your treasure goes. Look at where your time and your energy and your valuables go. That starts to tell you, it gives you a clue about where your heart actually is. He says, where your treasure is, well, that's where your heart is. People say, I love this over here, but I don't give any of my treasure to that. I don't give anything to that. I don't do anything with that. You say, well, do you really love this over here? Because if you did, that's where your treasure would go too. Like my wife. I love my wife. She's awesome. I married way out of my league. Somebody told me right before this experience that they met with my wife for coffee and it was amazing and she's amazing. And I'm like, yep, I know. I married way out of my league. But listen, I love my wife. I cherish my wife. I adore my wife. On our 10-year wedding anniversary, by the way, we've been married over 20 years now, but I really paid for it on my 10-year. My 20 years, she let me off the hook a little bit. On my 10-year anniversary, I bought her a ring. And I'm going to tell you that ring was probably 10 times more expensive than the ring I bought her when we got married. Now, the ring I bought her when we got married wasn't very expensive, people. Like, you did way better for your wife, I promise you. We didn't have anything, right? We had nothing, And so that's what we started with. She still wears that ring proudly. But on the 10th wedding anniversary, I stepped up big. Why? Because I love my wife, and because I love my wife, she gets the ring. She can have everything. She's got it all anyway. I'm just glad she cuts me a check every now and then. What you treasure, right? What you treasure, that's where your heart is. What you treasure, that's where your heart is. And so Jesus is challenging us in our lives and in his teaching to be generous people. My prayer for this message and my prayer for this season for our Central family has been that God would unleash a spirit of generosity in our hearts and lives towards one another, towards our community, towards our church, so that we can unleash a spirit of generosity towards our city, towards our communities, towards the people that we serve and pour into. And so here's some principles about how to get the most out of generosity. One principle from the Bible is simply this: to give freely. To give freely. So this last week, I went to Amarillo, Texas, my hometown. And I went there because my brother asked me to come. He's part of an organization called Avance Hope that rescues children in Uganda. They do incredible work. And so I went to speak at an event for them, and it was awesome. But as I'm there, I always go by my childhood home, and I did again, and I saw this tree. It's an amazing tree. I'm gonna show you a picture of it, not from this last week, but from this last year during the summer. Look at that tree. I planted that tree with my dad like 40 years ago. I can remember planting that tree. It's enormous now, you know. It came from something so small, just a little seed, you know, but now look at it. 40 years later, it casts shade. It's got huge branches. It's strong. It's enduring. And every time I go back home, I look at that tree and I'm just reminded like, wow, I planted that tree with my dad. And I think when it comes to our financial lives, a lot of us, we want our financial lives to look a lot like that tree. We want it to be strong. We want it to cast shade. We want it to be plentiful. We want it to be tough and able to endure storms. We want our financial lives to have a sense of security and a sense of enough. And friends, I think we can have those things in our lives as we follow God in faith. But the challenge is we've got to sow the seeds that ultimately grow into something like that tree. That tree didn't just magically show up, right? I had to plant the seed. I had to sow the seed, and then over time, the seed became this amazing tree. And this is what the Apostle Paul gets at in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, beginning in verse 8. Check it out. No, beginning in verse 6. He says, remember, a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. Hello. He's actually, we're gonna see, he's talking about money. He's not just talking about farming. He says a stingy planter gets a stingy crop. But look what he says. But a lavish planter gets a lavish crop. I want each of you to take plenty of time to think it over. That's what Paul says. And help me here. Make up your own mind. Hello, somebody. Make up your own mind what you will give. He's saying you need to think that over. You need to make up your own mind. Now, I think there's a lot of believers today who love Jesus, who love God, who serve, who use their gifts, but who aren't generous financially, and they've just never really given it time to make up their own mind. They've never really thought it through, prayed it through, journeyed it through with God. That's what Paul's encouraging us to do in our lives. He said that will protect you against what? You gotta love the Bible. Against sob stories and arm twisting, none of which I'm gonna do with you today. God loves it when the giver delights in the what? In the giving. He loves it when the giver delights in the giving. God can pour on the blessings in astonishing ways so that you're ready for anything and everything, more than just ready to do what needs to be done. It's the Message translation. So good. God can bless you. He can pour out his blessing in your life. But Paul's saying, look, you reap what you sow. A lot of us, we want kindness in our life. You want kindness, then sow kindness in your life, right? Be kind to people around you. Doesn't mean everybody that you meet in your life from then on out is always going to be kind. But here's what I promise you. If you sow kindness, you're going to reap more kindness than not. Right? If you sow love, you're gonna reap more love than not. If you sow hate and division, you're gonna reap hate and division, right? If you sow grace in people's lives and second chances, then when you fall, people will give you a second chance. It's not karma, it's bigger than that. It's just the law of sowing and reaping. But Paul's saying, look, it applies to our financial lives as well. When we sow generously, we reap generously. When I realized it wasn't that I couldn't afford to give, it was that I couldn't afford to not give. And I began systematically giving, not only to our local church at the time, but also to other nonprofits and organizations doing great things. Here's what began to happen in my life. It wasn't like a windfall happened. It wasn't like money showed up at my doorstep. I told you last week about my one story like that where groceries did show up at the doorstep, but that's only happened once. It wasn't like, all of a sudden the whole world kind of opened up and everything flipped upside down and it was amazing, but it was this systematic, continual sense. I was planting. I was being generous. I was being generous with our time, with our money, with our energy. As I was planting those seeds, over time, I look back now and it's grown into this huge, amazing thing. And God, I was driving to church with my wife today and I said, I think so many of the good things that have come into our life have come into our life because we've been generous with others. Not because we deserve it, but because it's the law of sowing and reaping. Because when you sow kindness and generosity, when you give faithfully and open-handedly, when you give not because the pastor pressured you or even, because you saw some guy on TV that pressured you, when you give because you get to that place in your spiritual journey like I did, where I said, look, I can trust God with my eternal salvation, but I don't trust God with $100. When I got to that place in my life, and nobody can get you there. You have to get there on your own journey. When I got there and finally said, all right, God, I'm going to trust you in this area of life. This is about you and me. It's about my relationship with you, not about all this other stuff, you and me. I'm gonna trust you in this area of my life. I was planting seeds that eventually grew into this beautiful, amazing thing. And I think because we've been a blessing, God has brought more blessing. Jesus said, if you're faithful with little, you'll be faithful with much. Some of us, we want to be faithful with much. That's what we keep praying for. God, bring the much, bring the much, bring the much. And I think maybe what God's nudging you with today is this simple thought. Are you faithful with the little? Are you faithful with the little? Are you faithful with the little, right? Be faithful with your little. Once you show that you can be faithful with much, maybe God will bring much into your life. But listen, the more God brings into your life, the more responsible you are and I am. It's not like everything just gets easy. Now you got to pray harder. You got to make more decisions. I've given away more in the last few years than I ever thought I would in my life to our church, to different organizations, because God has blessed me with more and I give more. God's brought it in and I give him. Why? I show him I was faithful with little. Now can I show I'm faithful with more? That's the question. Then if I can show I'm faithful with more, maybe he'll bring more into my life. But now I know it's not about me at all. It's about me being a conduit to pass on to others, to bless them. And I get the joy of that in my life. So give freely, whatever you do. Give because you feel led by God to give. Give freely. Here's another principle from the Bible, and that's give first. Give first in your heart and in your life. I read about this restaurant in New York City. I haven't been there, but it's called the Spotted Cheetah. And this restaurant, all the dishes, including the desserts, have Cheetos somewhere on the plate. Like all the meals have crumpled up Cheetos on them. The desserts have Cheetos on them. My kids would love this place. Like my son's all about the Cheetos. In fact, I think we got a few pictures here. This is the Flamin' Hot Lemon Chicken Tacos right here. Like there it is. Look at those Cheetos. And we got another one here. This is the Flaming Hot Mac and Cheddar, White Cheddar Mac and Cheetos right here, which this is supposed to be the bomb. It's amazing. I don't know what people are gonna come up with next. You know, bacon freaked me out. Bacon all over everything, right? Now Cheetos all over everything. I don't know what's next, but here's what I can promise you. You're never gonna find a restaurant that champions all of their dishes having leftovers on top of whatever they serve. Can you imagine that? That leftover 3-day-old meatloaf, we're gonna serve that up right here. That blob from the back of the freezer, that half-eaten burrito. I mean, in our family, we don't do well with leftovers. We get those leftovers together, you know, I put them in the Tupperware or whatever, we set it in the fridge and all of that, and then inevitably, you know, we walk by that and we go, no. Next day, no. And then somewhere after a week, let's be honest, a month, I don't know how long, living things are now growing in that Tupperware. And sometimes I don't even wash the Tupperware, if I'm being honest. I just take it out and trash the whole thing, move on to the next thing. Just avoid the smell right there. These things are cheap. None of us like leftovers, and God doesn't like leftovers either. Exodus chapter 23, verse 19. Look at this. Here's what God says. He says, bring the best of the, help me, first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Now, this was an agricultural society, and God's saying, look, here's what I want you to do. He goes, when you are getting the harvest and you're bringing in your crops, he says, I want you to bring the first, right? Bring the first. Now, this was a high-risk proposition. I mean, in that time, in that day and age, you could be getting a harvest and bringing in the first of your crops, and there's no guarantee. Like, you know, you're not going to get a bug infestation or you know, an invading army is going to come through and take over the crops, or all of a sudden the weather's going to turn, right? You know, like, this was a risky deal, but God says, look, the first of your harvest, I want you to bring it as an offering to me, the first fruits of all your crops. And so it's a biblical principle. You see, it was also with animals. Some people were farmers not of the land, but they had cattle and animals. And so you were to take, you know, the firstborn sheep, and you were to bring it as an offering to the Lord. You know, and God got very angry with the people in Malachi. We'll look at this later, because, you know, they would look at the firstborn and go, well, that one looks pretty good. And they would look over all their sheep and they would find the one that was like maimed and kind of like, and they're like, that one, let's take that one to church. And they were offering that to God. And that's why in the book of Malachi, God kind of throws down on the people of Israel because he's like, why are you bringing me the leftovers, right? He's like, I don't want the leftovers. I want the first. Now, here's the thing. Why the first? Why does the first matter? Because the first was about trust and faith. God doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your stuff. But God does want your heart, right? And so bringing the first was all about, God, I'm putting you first in my heart and in my life. I'm going to trust you first. It was a faith step that people took. And so they would bring the first. Look at this. Book of Proverbs, chapter 3, verse 9 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to what? Overflowing. And your vats will brim over with new wine. Somebody's like, I want that. I want that overflowing, lots of wine. Like, I want that. That sounds great, but we gotta, if you want that, you gotta go back up to the first part of the sentence. Honor the Lord with your wealth. What does that look like for you? I think it means that you give God a portion that you've made up in your own mind to give. I think it means you give cheerfully and generously, not begrudgingly, not out of guilt, not out of all these arm-twisting kind of stories, right? I think you do it with joy. And I think it means that you give in such a way that you give to him first. You're giving him the first of what he's given to you. So what I've done for years, every time I get paid, first thing I do when I get paid, I have it set up automatically. It goes immediately to God. I give a portion immediately to God. It's the way I give him the first. In other words, I'm not waiting around to say, did I get the rent paid? And did I get the bills paid? And have all the credit cards paid? And then whatever's left over, I'll give to God. I'm saying, no, I'm gonna budget. I'm gonna have a spending plan like we talked about last week. I'm gonna try to live responsibly in a framework. And then I'm gonna give the first that I have to God. Not because he needs it, not because the church needs it, but ultimately because of my relationship with God, I'm living in a trust relationship with him and I'm bringing him the first. Bring him the first. So give freely, give first, and then give generously. Give generously in your heart and in your life. Look at this story that Jesus tells. He tells a story in Mark chapter 12 of this woman that comes and she gives an offering at the temple. And the offering was basically 2 pennies, not very much at all. But Jesus tells this amazing story about her. Mark chapter 12, verse 43, Jesus calls his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions. For they gave a tiny part of their what? Surplus. But she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. And Jesus makes an example of her. In other words, when we're generous at a sacrificial level, it definitely captures some of the heart of God. That doesn't mean we need to be irresponsible, doesn't mean we need to be crazy, but to be generous beyond just our surplus is an awesome thing. And I think you'll see God move and work in your life as you do. So we've got a few ways that you could be generous at Central. One of them is to be a generosity rock star, to sign up, to give a reoccurring gift online and across our locations. We'll have an opportunity for you to do that if you want after our service. Another is to give. Some of you do that already, or you're generous in a lot of ways, but you've never tithed. The word tithe is a word that means tenth. It means you're trusting God with the 10% of everything that he gives you in your life. And I know some of you are already overwhelmed, and that's an overwhelming proposition. And I'm not trying to add guilt onto you over this issue, but I think when you're ready to step into that, you'll be blessed accordingly as you follow God in faith. Look at what God says in Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 10. He says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And then, what does he say? Test. You see that? Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty. Now, God all through the Bible says, don't test me. Right? It's a huge principle. You don't test God. But this is the one place in the Bible where God says, test me. Go ahead. I double dog dare you. He says, see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. God doesn't need anything if he's God, right? If he's God, he's got everything. So it's really not about God's need. It's really not about, the need in our world. It's about you and me. Are we willing to give God our hearts? And God knows that where our treasure is, there our heart will be also. Are we willing to treasure the things of God? And so the tithe in the Old Testament was a floor, if you will. It wasn't the ceiling, it was the floor. It was a place where people had a number as they gave back to God and were generous to him. And if you've never tithed, that could be a great way for you to open up more of God's blessing in your life. Will it be financial? I don't know. Will it be health? I don't know. Will it be more love, joy, peace, patience, kindness in your life? I don't know. Will it be more of a sense of peace even if you face incredibly difficult circumstances? I don't know, but I believe it will be worth it. I saw my brother this last week. My oldest brother is 17 years older than me. And he's had a lot of medical challenges. He's not in a great place with his health right now. And he's juggling something some of you are juggling in your life where you try to, all these medications that help this mess you up over here. And so, you try to manage that, and you take these medications over here and that messes you up over there. And it's just like one thing after another. And, I thought about him all week long. I love him, but I feel like he's just, he's hurting. And I'm having to help him get around. He's got a cane. And the thing is, my brother is one of the most generous human beings I've ever known in my life. Like, truly. I mean, that guy will give you the shirt on his back. And he's done that his whole life. He was in banking for years. And then the latter part of his life, he became a pastor after I did. I actually got to ordain him into ministry, which was one of the great moments that I'll never forget in my life. But what I always know about my brother Jim is that Jim, based on his income, gave so much away that people would be shocked. Gave enough away that he and his wife had words more than once. He was generous. He was generous. And what I saw in my brother, even though he's hurting, even though he's struggling, is God has still opened up the floodgates of heaven and blessed him with love and joy and peace and family and a positive attitude and a positive spirit, even in the midst of all of that. I don't know what the blessing will look like, but I take God at his word. Test me in this and see if I don't pour out blessing in your heart and in your life. This week, we all saw on the news, we lost one of our literally greatest individuals in our entire generation this past week. It's the Reverend Billy Graham passed away, and such an incredible inspiration. I mean, Billy Graham had spoken all over the world, so many crusades, so many messages. Many of you have been impacted by him. I've been impacted by him. 180 countries he held rallies in, 6 continents, was a friend and a counselor to 12 presidents. His estimated lifetime audience topped 2.2 billion, and more than 3.2 million responded to the good news of Jesus through his ministry. Wow, amazing. His most viral quote, at one point shared every 15 seconds on Twitter, was actually first stated by one of his heroes and one of mine, a guy named D.L. Moody, and he personalized it for himself. You've read it probably this week. It goes like this: someday you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. I shall be more alive than I am now. I will just have changed my address. I will have gone into the presence of God. At one point he said this: God's given us 2 hands, one to receive with and the other to give with. We are not cisterns made for hoarding. We are channels made for sharing. For years, I thought I couldn't afford to be generous. God showed me I couldn't afford to not be generous. So for you in your life, maybe you've never taken that step to trust God with the resources that he's given you. I want to challenge you for your sake to go on that journey. Make up your own mind. Study God's word. Test him in this. See if he doesn't respond in a powerful way. Maybe you're here today and maybe you've been a generosity rock star, but you've never really placed your giving at a 10% level to tithe. And maybe that's the next step for you to consider, to trusting God in that way. Maybe you tithe. Lori and I have tithed for 25 years, but over the last several years, we've known as God has blessed us with more, we needed to give more. It's not like the tithe is the ceiling. I just believe you can't outgive God. When I'm generous, God will be generous in my life. I trust him, I put him first. It keeps my priorities aligned because where my treasure is, there my heart is. So of all the habits we talked about last week, the pay now habit, the pay yourself habit, very important, and the pay it forward habit, I'm partial to the pay it forward habit. I think that's the habit supernaturally that unlocks so many of God's blessings in the financial side of our life. So some of you are here today and you're like, God, I wish you would trust me with more. My question is, are you being faithful with your little? Are you being faithful with your little? God's gave you two hands, one to receive, one to share. Take a portion of what he's given you, bless other people, and you'll never regret that. You can't afford to not be generous. Let's bow and pray together. God, we thank you for your love for us. We thank you for your word and for the power of generosity in all of our lives. And I pray that you will inspire us to follow you joyfully and cheerfully, and to give generously in a way that will impact other people's lives for your goodness and for your grace. We thank you. In Christ's name, amen. Well, across our locations now, I'm going to throw it to our location pastors to talk us through some next steps. Why don't you give it up for them?
Well, if you felt challenged today to become a generosity rock star, I want to encourage you to just do that right now. Don't wait another day, another minute. Do it right now. Sign up at centralonline.tv/give. When you do, we want to send you this free signed copy of our Central Live album, Greater. And we're also going to send you a commemorative coin that you can keep in your purse, your pocket, your wallet, just to remind you of the difference you're making in someone else's heart and life, as well as the difference that God is making in your own heart and life through your generosity. Well, from now until next week, hold on to Romans 8. If God is for us, who could be against us? We'll see you next week as we close our series, Like a Boss.